What we do here is go back.
I'm gay.
Just as a quick disclaimer, I'm a fan of Idubbbz, and this isn't going to be like some crazy exposed or drama video where I point at him and I'll be like, holy shit, this guy's such a hypocritical piece of shit, he's literally Hitler. Nothing like that here. I'm just going to be critiquing some of the ideas that he presents. So this video deals with some sort of serious topics, like language, slurs, history, psychology. Some of the things I talk about might be a bit confronting, especially as I'm talking about a pejorative word with a lot of history that ends in a hard R that has been used to describe one of the most oppressed minority groups of all time. I'm of course talking about the word gamer. That's right, for too long we have been held down. The time has come, my fellow gamers, to rise up! No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, I'm talking about the N-word. Just one more thing about the clips that I use in this video. So most of the clips I use are either from the Content Cop on Tana Mongu, I don't know, or when Idubbbz criticizes Apple for taking down a mobile game. But I think I made sure to use statements that weren't specific to either of these things, where he was addressing an audience or issues more generally. With that in mind, if you think I've taken something out of context or used a clip unfairly, then be sure to let me know. Alright, let's get started. Hi. In today's video, I'm going to talk about what Idubbbz says in regards to slurs, symbols, language, and the power that they hold. So a summary of his position seems to be that in order to avoid hypocrisy, maintain consistency and clarity, that a word or symbol should never be off limits to anyone. He usually encapsulates this with the catchphrase, it's either all okay or none of it's okay.
I tend to subscribe to the idea that either everything's okay or none of it's okay. It's either all okay or none of it's okay. Either all of them are okay or none of them are okay.
He also says that these taboo slurs and symbols will lose their power and be normalized over time through frequent use.
Have you or your friends ever said a word so frequently that it's lost a lot of the initial punch that it had? I'm one of the guys who's like, I want to bring the swastika back.
And finally, that placing any importance or giving any sort of power to these things is ultimately detrimental to any sort of societal righteous cause that you may have.
All of you people out there who hold these words at such high esteem, you are giving it the power that you so desperately want it to not have. I would really prefer it if Hitler didn't win, but you're letting him win right now because you're calling me a little Hitler youth. I'm not a Hitler youth. I just want to fucking draw a cool looking design, and the swastika is a pretty cool design.
No, I'd say this is a pretty fair summary of his position, and to be honest, at face value, I kind of agree with some of this. For me though, the background thought process that you use to arrive at a conclusion and the way you contextualize your conclusion can be just as, if not more, important than the conclusion itself. So the way you justify your viewpoints can determine how you apply it to different scenarios. And it can also change how other people interpret your statements and apply it to their own lives. With that in mind, although I mostly agree with these points, the way he contextualizes and justifies them is what I take issue with. So I'll have a look at some of the things he has said related to this issue of language and power, and see if there are any issues there that might make it so his position can be too easily interpreted in a way to justify or excuse actual racist behavior. And don't worry, I'll give you some real examples of that happening. Oof, so it's gonna get a little bit spicy. Just stick with it though.
Don't know much about history.
We are very fucking stupid to hold the word nigger at this colossally high standard, whereas every other slur, that can be used in a comedic sense or an editorial sense, but not this one, because that one has history. Well, guess what, fucking retards? All the other ones have history too.
So there's a lot to unpack here. I'll start off with the easy part first. So Idubbbz seems to create this fake universe where apparently the N-word is absolutely unacceptable in every case, comedic, editorial, but that these slurs are just bandied about willy-nilly all the time.
Every other slur, that can be used in a comedic sense or an editorial sense, but not this one.
So he's strawmanning here, unless he's speaking very specifically to Tana, but I don't think that's the case. It seems to me that he's speaking more in general terms about the use of slurs in the media and society at large. So this dichotomy he creates that's apparently really hypocritical is basically false. The idea that a large group of people or that artists and people in the media generally believe that all these slurs can be used in comedic or editorial ways, yet the N-word cannot, is just not true. Of course, you can always find like one or two people that believe something hypocritical or inconsistent, but I'm speaking in general terms that I don't think this is something pervasive in society. I think most people that have an issue with this word, they're probably likely to have an issue with the use of these words too. So there are several instances in comedy alone where the N-word has been used quite liberally and got little to no outrage.
Mark Twain once said, "A man who always tells the truth doesn't have to remember what he said." And that's great. But Mark Twain also said there once was a big black guy named Nigger Jim. So...
You take the word nigger. There is absolutely nothing wrong with the word nigger in and of itself. It's the racist asshole who's using it that you ought to be concerned about.
It's between you and my nigger, right? It's between me and
Yes,
you.
I'm your nigger. Yes.
So how you gonna find out?
You're one crazy nigger.
Now those are just examples right off the top of my head from bits that I was already aware of comedians using the N-word. I'm certain there's like a million different examples of it happening. It's not like all these guys were suddenly outcasted and shunned and branded as racist. No, apart from Louis C.K. a little bit, but that's irrelevant to the whole race thing. So he's basically just outright wrong that the N-word can't be used in an editorial or comedic sense. Now, is there a discrepancy between how these words are treated in certain circumstances? Maybe the N-word is put on more of a pedestal. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I'll be charitable and accept that's the truth for the sake of argument. There's a bit of a reason for it, and it is to do with history. Now, Idubbbz had this to say about the history of the word.
Because that one has history. Well, guess what, fucking retards? All the other ones have history too. Zipperhead? Yeah. Asian people didn't get their fucking heads ran over in World War II. They weren't thrown into internment camps.
Just bear with me through this next part. I'm not going to be saying anything particularly flashy or sexy. There are no nuclear hot takes here. Just some basic research and talking points that I think illustrate how what Idubbbz said about history is a bit naive. So he says that the N-word has history, but that all these other words have history too. And he's completely right, they do all have history. However, they don't all have the same history, and the demographics they target don't all have the same standing in modern America. Now you might think, well, why does that matter? And I'll get to it, okay? You may think I'm being a bit pedantic here, but trust me, this is a very important distinction to make. So black people have a fairly unique history and place in America. I think a lot of it is well documented. They were brought in as slaves a long time ago. So after slavery, you had stuff like Jim Crow laws and redlining, which meant that black people were literally not offered the same opportunities and access to education. They were prohibited from taking out loans from banks, having access to the same businesses. And if you want to go even further than that, you can look at stuff like the war on drugs and how that was very specifically targeting minority groups, especially African Americans. And all this was pretty commonplace until relatively recently. So a large portion of African Americans today have direct ancestors that went through this. This is not to say that other groups and demographics haven't had their own struggles. And yeah, obviously internment camps and how they were treated is fucking horrible. But in general, it's not quite up to the same extent and doesn't affect as many people in modern society. Because on average, other ethnic groups can trace their ancestry to much more recent migrants. So if you take the Asian comparison that Idubbbz makes, most Asians in America today can trace their roots back to migrants that came after 1965. And most of them came seeking better opportunities, as an economic migrant or to have access to the top universities. So the starting point of a lot of people of Asian descent is a bit higher up than those of African descent. And that sort of generational burden has a big effect. It's a lot different if your ancestors were literally brought in as slaves a long time ago and then systemically held down until relatively recently, as opposed to if your parents willingly immigrated in 1980 to go to a university or to work as a doctor. So basically, Asian Americans are less likely than African Americans to have recent ancestors that were systemically fucked. Alright, so what the hell does any of this have to do with slurs? Well, I'll tell you. The use of slurs and their effects have been widely studied in psychology, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they can reinforce a lot of implicit biases, and further on from that, they can maintain and perpetuate certain unequal power structures and racist institutions. So if racist institutions completely ended in the 60s, then that would be fine, and these slurs really wouldn't matter much. But unfortunately, the damage done has a lot of long-term effects that kind of self-perpetuate with the help of cognitive biases. Well, what are these racist institutions that still exist? Well, the criminal justice system for one. So a prime example of that is black people on average getting much longer sentences when controlling for the crime committed. So literally, for committing the same crime, a white person is more likely to get a lighter sentence than a black person. Or despite how they have similar drug use rates, black people are much more likely to be arrested on marijuana possession. And this extends also to the job market. So if you have a traditionally white sounding name, you are much more likely to be called back by a potential employer than if you have a very black sounding name, even if you have the exact same qualifications. So all of this means that black people spend more time in jail, they have less access to the same employment opportunities, which means that they generate less income, and they have a lot more broken homes, which are leading indicators of more crime being committed. So it's a cycle that feeds itself, and it's difficult to break out of. So when you use a slur or make a joke, you run the risk of perpetuating some of these systems which have their roots in racism. Now, before you freak out, obviously this is not always the case. You can use slurs in such a way that it has very little chance of perpetuating any racist institutions or empowering any racist ideas. Like I showed you before, there are plenty of examples of people using the N-word without it being racist. Hell, I don't think Idubbbz' use of the word is racist, but sometimes it is the case that even if you think they are just jokes, it can slowly seep into the public consciousness and reinforce certain ideas that can influence a lot of things, like how a policeman might handle a situation, or how a judge sentences, or how a prosecutor handles the plea bargaining process, or how an employer views their candidates. Now, if you're really skeptical of this and think in terms of, oh, I would never do such a thing, I can recognize what a joke is, I would never let a joke cloud my judgment in any way, so I find this hard to believe on a grander scale, I completely understand that sentiment. It can be tough to understand how these things are borne out in reality. However, this isn't really about you or any specific individual. This is about general pervasive ideas that obviously still exist in society, because that's what the empirical evidence suggests. Because on some level, these jokes and stereotypes have an underlying layer of belief that a lot of people still hold, and which can be reinforced by the use of a slur. I just want to show that Idubbbz' comments on history were a little bit incomplete and shallow, and lacked the required nuance to tackle a topic such as slurs. And I wanted to demonstrate why there might be a bit more of a stigma around the N-word when compared to other slurs. And that's because it probably has more of a real-life impact. It's why words such as honky or cracker aren't viewed as nearly as controversial, even though they both technically have history too, because it doesn't really seem to have a systemic negative effect on white people. Alright, now fuck that shit, we're done with the boring part, let's talk about some interesting stuff. Well, when is it okay to say these words? Surely it's about the intention behind the word, right? Let's have a look at what Idubbbz has to say about intent, and then we can go from there.
I wouldn't deem her racist because I don't know what's in here or what's in here.
So this statement seems pretty problematic to me. It's problematic to me because the implication of saying that you can't ever know what someone's thinking or feeling is that you should never really call someone racist because you don't know if they are. And he is right in that I can't actually know. I technically can never know anyone's motivations for doing anything. But that doesn't mean you can't inductively reason why they probably did it. So for instance, technically I can't really know that Hitler was a racist, right? I mean, I don't actually know what went on in his head or what his feelings towards other people were. I don't actually know that for sure. You know, we don't have a machine right now where I can transfer my consciousness into Hitler's brain and see the inner workings of his mind. I can't view his thought process as it happens with 100% clarity. Now, I can say there was a high probability that he was racist because of the things he said and did, but I can't ever really know. But to even entertain that thought is pretty absurd. It's just circular and pointless in a practical real-life situation. Because obviously Hitler was a racist. We have to be able to ascribe intentions and motivations to people's behavior based on the evidence. So in a legal sense, you can see how this would become quite important to be able to ascribe intentions and motivations on people's actions. Because a person's motive can often determine whether they've done something criminal or not. If you kill someone in self-defense, it's different to just outright murdering someone. And you build a case as to why it was self-defense or why it was murder. But if you want to get really absurd with it, then technically you can never know, and all killings are reduced to being the same thing. Now that would make things a hell of a lot easier, that either all killings are equally punishable or none of them are punishable. Hey, it came back full circle to that thing he said. So it seems like Idubbbz is looking for simplicity and ease in a topic that's immensely complex. And with that in mind, I think this whole thing of you can't ever know what's in here or what's in here is a pretty shallow and vacuous thing to say. No one really disagrees with that. I think it's accepted that technically no one can ever know anyone's true feelings about any matter. When you accuse someone of being a racist, the implication is that you inductively reason that they are probably a racist and that you can argue why you think someone is or isn't. Just hand-waving it away because because you can't really know for sure is just lazy, and it gives actual racist people a bit of a shield to hide behind.
I want to bring the swastika back. I thought it was a cool design. And now I can't even write it in my notebook without a teacher coming up and saying, "You're a little white supremacist." And I'm like, no, I'm not a white supremacist. I just think it's a cool design. I would really prefer it if Hitler didn't win, but you're letting him win right now because you're calling me a little Hitler youth. I'm not a Hitler youth. I just want to fucking draw a cool looking design, and the swastika is a pretty cool design.
So in Idubbbz' hypothetical situation, a kid who is not a white supremacist, doesn't have any racist beliefs or anything, doodles the swastika on his notebook. And a teacher, despite this kid's intentions, assumes that he is a Nazi or a white supremacist. And Idubbbz thinks this is kind of shitty. But I don't even know if the teacher's being unreasonable here. You know what, I can explain why best with a hypothetical of my own. Now, let's say if I were to walk around with a t-shirt that has the badge of a sports team on it, people may assume that I'm a fan of that sports team. They might even stop and talk to me about their latest results, even though I never said I was a fan. Actually, I lied. This isn't a hypothetical. This actually happened to me. I wore a t-shirt with the badge of a soccer team on it, and random people at the supermarket at university just stopped by and started talking to me. I'll give you another example. If you see a guy out in public wearing a cop uniform, now you may not be correct, but a lot of people would assume that this guy might be a cop. So you can probably see what my point here is. What Idubbbz is suggesting that we do, which is to untie the association between the swastika and Nazi ideology, goes against basic human nature. If you've ever studied schemas in psychology, you'll understand that in order to process information very quickly, that we organize it into clusters or groups that we can then pull information from whenever it's needed. So this means, based on our past experience, that we have certain preconceived ideas of how things work in the world. This sort of thought process is not 100% logical or fact-based. It can sometimes lead to things like false assumptions being made, or incorrect and harmful stereotypes being formed. However, it's also a cognitive function that helps us a lot in our day-to-day lives. We can condense complex ideas and make judgments very quickly, based on our past experiences. What I'm essentially saying is, it's basically impossible for us at least in Western civilization, to detach the swastika from Nazi ideology right now. If you see a kid doodling a Nazi symbol, it kind of makes sense why the teacher would assume that the kid or his parents are Nazis, right? People that tend to draw swastikas or tattoo swastikas or wave Nazi flags around are pretty likely to be racist Nazis. Idubbbz may think it's sad that the teacher assumes that the kid's a Nazi and that's bad because the kid's not a Nazi, but I say fuck it. It's basically natural that the teacher assumes that. I mean, what kind of dumbass just idly doodles a swastika on a school notebook for no reason? There's a reason why very specific groups of people that believe in a certain ideology do very specific things and use very specific symbols. It's to convey a message and to show that they represent a certain belief system. So if there's a thing that Nazis do that's very specific to them, like randomly drawing the swastika around for no reason, then probably don't do those things. Otherwise you open yourself up for others to assume that you're a fucking Nazi. Quite understandably so, I think. Especially if it's used in a situation where it's unclear what the person's intentions are. Now, of course, ideally, you'd want to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, but at the end of the day, if it walks like a duck and looks like a duck, a lot of motherfuckers are gonna assume that it's a duck. What I'm saying is, don't expect to brandish the swastika around in public and not expect to get pulled up for it. I mean, I very well can't just go around in a KKK uniform and say, oh, I'm not actually a racist, I'm just doing this for a meme. Oh, I actually just like the way it looks, I'm not a racist at all. Even if you think you're just doing this as like an ironic meme or whatever, or you think your intentions are purely artistic, if the end result of your actions are virtually indistinguishable from the actions of a person who's actually being serious about that or are actually racist, then is there really a difference?
It's not who I am underneath, but what I do that defines me.
I'm not going to say that intention is completely irrelevant. You can make a very strong argument that intention matters in trying to predict how people will behave in the future. Also, if you want to reverse or change someone's behavior, it's important to know where they're coming from. A person that kills someone by accident is less of a future threat to their society than someone who murders intentionally. However, in both cases, regardless of intent, some guy dies. I mean, at some point, the person claiming to make an ironic racist joke is just being racist as well. And a perfect example of that is this very stupid cunt and his band of drooling troglodyte friends.
Nigger, 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 nigger. You like the N-word? Yeah, I hate niggers. No offense. But you're not that black.
KFC and watermelon. East LA. Welfare office.
Welfare.
Jordans. Grape soda. Niggers.
Oh yeah, no racism there, boys. Just jokes, by the way. Haha, jokes. I mean, how many of the thousands of retards that are watching that might actually kind of believe that black people are just stupid or commit a lot of crime because of the warrior gene or some shit? I mean, the whole joke there was literally just, haha, black people.
Chad is legit racist. You know, there's a way where you can be racist and it's like satire, right? But to me, it comes off as, this motherfucker is a racist, like...
A lot of people use this veil of, oh, I'm just being ironic, oh, it's just satire, bro, to actually just do really bad, dumb shit. You know, it's just another version of, it's just a prank, bro.
It's a prank!
Look, I'm not gonna pretend like I never make racially charged or edgy jokes or use slurs when speaking in private amongst my friends, but I know what aspect of the joke we're laughing at. You know, the subversion of expectation, the absurdity, the shock value. That shit's funny to me. As long as it actually remains just harmless jokes, I'm as edgy as they come. But I avoid saying this stuff when amongst strangers, and I'd certainly avoid it if I had a platform of thousands or millions of people. Because I don't want some moron to listen to my edgy comments and come away thinking, ha! Yeah, black people really are stupid and poor. You know, unless I make it very clear that I'm joking and that I don't really believe this stuff. Which most good comedians can do that in a clever way. I think even Idubbbz makes it pretty fucking clear. But this twat really doesn't. The things that Idubbbz has said about intentions makes it way too easy for dumbasses to just say and do racist shit and deflect it away with, it's ironic memes, boys. I'm just the edge boy. Well, anyway, this whole thing about satire, irony, when is a joke appropriate or when is it not, how to use your platform responsibly while still being true to yourself. This is a big topic that a lot of comedians have had to struggle with, and it deserves a section of its own, and I'll come back to it towards the end of the video. But first I wanna return back to Idubbbz, because one of the things that he claims, and I know this is a common line of thinking, is that if you normalize these sort of slurs and symbols, that they lose their power. Well, let's break that down a little.
Have you or your friends ever said a word so frequently that it's lost a lot of the initial punch that it had, and eventually it just lost all meaning entirely? All of you people out there who hold these words at such high esteem, you are giving it the power that you so desperately want it to not have.
So Idubbbz says here that the N-word gets its power from the fact that it's seen as so rude and taboo, so that if you start using it more regularly, then it would lose some of its power and its meaning. Basically, another way of saying this is that if the N-word becomes more acceptable in society, that its racial implications will go down. However, if that were true, then the N-word would have lacked power during times of slavery or Jim Crow when it was used more regularly and wasn't seen as taboo. But of course, the N-word didn't lack power during that time. And that was the height of racism, which I think is a much more important factor when considering how powerful a slur is. See, the power of the word doesn't come from the fact that it sounds a bit shocking or that it has an initial punch. It comes from the fact that it has real-life impacts, that it has been used and is still used today as a way to spread racist messages. See, these slurs don't just get their power based on how frequently they're used or because it's seen as rude or taboo, so that if you just start using it a bunch of times, that it loses all power and meaning. I reject that idea. These words get their power through bigotry. A slur can only have as much power as whatever idea it represents. So if racism is really prevalent in society, then the slurs that are used to perpetuate that racism or to discriminate against others becomes more powerful because of how it can impact real life and real people. Like if racism no longer existed, then the N-word would lose all its power. It doesn't matter at all. So while I understand Idubbbz' sentiment, I think it is impossible for us right now to untie racist ideas from the N-word while racism against black people still exists in the US and in other parts of the world. You know, historically and today, when people use the N-word, it is often fueled by bigoted ideas or being used by a racist. And this relates back to the schema stuff I talked about earlier with untying the swastika from Nazi ideology. It's kind of similar to that. So if you take Idubbbz' statements to its logical conclusion, then we should really be using the N-word indiscriminately, like all the time. to make it reduce power, right? I don't think he actually means that or wants that to happen, even though that is what his statement suggests. And just to make my point clear, he is right that a word does lose some of its initial punch if used a bunch of times, but that's not where the power of the word comes from. I'm sure the word didn't have much of a punch during times of slavery and it wasn't seen as taboo for people to use it, but it still held an enormous amount of power because of the real life impacts it would have on African Americans and the opportunities they were afforded.
Racism, we are not cured of. It's not just a matter of it not being polite to say nigger in public. That's not the measure of whether racism still exists or not. It's not just a matter of overt discrimination. Societies don't overnight completely erase everything that happened 200 to 300 years prior.
The issue with racism or the N-word is not the word itself. It's just racism, like the entire fundamental idea and the systems that support it. Now, if Idubbbz meant that in some hypothetical situation that we were somehow able to use the N-word so much in so many different contexts that it literally just completely changed meanings to something else, then sure, I agree, I guess, if this hypothetical really was possible. However, if the N-word really does somehow just become another word, then what would that achieve if racism still exists? I mean, racist people would still co-opt some other word to use in a racist way, right? I mean, that's even assuming you could cleanse the word of its racist background anyway. But he is right in that in a vacuum, no word really means anything. Sort of analogous or comparable to money. So fundamentally, money is just paper and metal. It only holds any value at all because we kind of decided that it does. But, and this is key, that doesn't make the value of money any less real just because we give it that power. In a vacuum, these pieces of paper and metal are basically worthless. Just as, in a vacuum, these words basically mean nothing, and they don't have any power either. But unfortunately, we do live in a society, bottom text, and not in a vacuum. So there's no real problem with the N-word in and of itself. The N-word has just become a way with which you can spread racist messages and discriminate. We can't just erase what a word has historically meant. It can slowly change meaning, but again, I think it's very hard, if not impossible, to break all racist connotation away from the N-word right now while racism still exists. In the end, if someone is racist, you want to attack the underlying beliefs that make them racist. So if someone you know uses the N-word in a really weird, sort of racist way, in response to that, you don't want to then just use the word 10 times as much as them in the hopes that maybe their racism will disappear.
I remember initially hearing the word cunt and how awful that sounded, but I've used it so frequently that it means fucking nothing to me now.
Idubbbz makes a comparison with the word cunt to make his point, but for me that comparison doesn't really work because cunt isn't a racial slur and it doesn't have the same historical significance and weight that the N-word has. Yeah, the word wasn't literally used to enslave a whole group of people and oppress them for years on end. It doesn't have that same mental imprint on the collective consciousness of a society. So because of these reasons, I think it's subject to be more malleable or flexible in its meaning and significance. So for example, cunt is much less offensive in Australia compared to America. And to add on to that, he's using it in situations in which the word means nothing. But if, for example, a family member or someone that Idubbbz deeply cares about is really upset with him, and they call him a cunt to illustrate that, it's not like the word would mean nothing there at all, right? They chose the word cunt for a reason. It points to how strongly they feel about his hypothetical actions. Just to reiterate, the word doesn't just get its power based on how frequently it's used or what it sounds like or that it's seen as taboo. It gets its power based on how people use it, the context they use it in, and the kind of impact that it might have on wider society. I mean, if Idubbbz's suggestions were true, then no word would ever mean anything if you just kept using it. We need words to have a meaning and power, otherwise we can't communicate. So that when you use specific words, you generally mean something very specific, and you use it for a reason. And this shouldn't really be anything controversial. I mean, you shouldn't be afraid of any word in the language, but you do have to be careful about how you use them, and that applies to every word, not just slurs. The fact that Idubbbz doesn't recognize this, and with his comments he implicitly suggests that we should just start using the N-word a lot, I think that just serves as another excuse for people to use it in harmful ways, under the false pretense or guise of, oh, I'm just normalizing the word, we shouldn't be afraid of it, it's words, that's all it is. When it's actually a lot more complicated than just that. When you try to normalize some of these words, you run the risk of normalizing the idea that these words represent, which of course in the N-word is racist ones, even though you yourself may not be a racist. You can see this a lot in niche internet communities. Like, things start off as edgy jokes and memes, slowly it starts getting more and more serious, until suddenly a bunch of racist people are amongst them, and they feel like they're in good company and you're not sure who's joking anymore. I know that that's kind of a weird concept to wrap your head around, but I think this is how it often plays out in reality. And I'm going to elaborate more on that in the next topic.
I was doing sketches that were funny, but socially irresponsible. It's like you're getting flooded with things and you don't pay attention to things like your ethics. It was a good spirit or intention behind it. But what I didn't consider is how many people watch a show. The way people use television is subjective. Somebody on set that was white laughed in such a way. I know the difference of people laughing with me and people laughing at me. And it was the first time I'd ever gotten a laugh that I was uncomfortable with.
So there's a reason why I used these specific clips from Anything for Views instead of clips from any racist asshole, right? And it's because this guy is close to Idubbbz. Clearly, they've worked together quite a bit. They have some sort of understanding and relationship. And my thinking was, if someone in the public eye that has a decent understanding of Idubbbz is willing to do that kind of shit, what might some of the people in his viewer base of millions be willing to do and also feel justified in doing so because of the things he has said in justifying the use of the N-word. Now, whether Idubbbz likes it or not, that is a very real effect that he has on some people. And no, before anyone brings this up, this is not just guilt by association. I'm not implying that Idubbbz is racist because he has a racist friend. What I'm saying is that his language and justifications will lead other people to feel more comfortable doing and saying racist things. And Chad is not even the only high-profile example of this happening.
Who his slogan is nigger faggot. And I'm not going to get in trouble because I'm just quoting him.
Yeah.
Nigger faggot whore. It's just a wonderful string of words that really gets you going. Fuck you, nigger faggot.
Yeah.
I love that I can just...
Sheila, don't look at him, look at me. I'm mad at you. What is this?
Ian's
this is my podcast now.
Oh, shit. Oh, God, this...
Bitch.
I love that I can just say nigger faggot, though.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't really say that.
Do you feel like...
Empowered?
I feel like you're using it a little liberally.
I love saying nigger faggot. It's so wonderful.
This was honestly kind of cute. Ethan just could not wait to say it. He's like a little kid trying to impress his bigger brother. I mean, I think even Idubbbz felt a bit uncomfortable with that. Ethan's shtick there wasn't all that bad, really. It was a bit cringy, and he did start using the word quite liberally, but I don't think he's actually bigoted or anything. I think he just got a little bit overexcited because Idubbbz was around, and he felt like he had license to say and do these things. He's just a bit of a cringy buffoon. But again, Idubbbz enables or empowers Ethan's behavior, which then I think further empowers even more extreme behavior than that. You know, this podcast isn't going out to just a few hundred people. There's literally millions, where people that are actually racist or bigoted feel like their beliefs are being given a stamp of approval. I think maybe it's difficult for YouTubers to understand the kind of impact that they might be having, in contrast to old school mainstream comedians who probably understand this better. You know, there's a lower barrier of entry to becoming a YouTuber than there is to becoming a mainstream comedian on television. You're not required to perform in front of a live crowd and see their reactions in real time. And because of this, maybe a lot of mainstream comedians on television have a different perspective on this, and a lot of them have talked about this issue, about using comedy in a responsible way with the platform that they have. So that Dave Chappelle clip I showed at the start is a good example. There's also Chris Rock, who had a bit called Niggas vs. Black People that he eventually retired. And quote, "By the way, I've never done that joke again, ever, and I probably never will," says Rock, because some people that were racist thought they had license to say the N-word, so I'm done with that routine. Another comedian, Stuart Lee, has often talked about the use of his platform and how he doesn't want to appeal to the wrong kind of person.
When you make a joke amongst friends or to an audience like this, here, these are like sophisticated London people, they're clever, they get irony and they know it's not meant with any aggression or hatred, but we don't know who's out there watching this. Anyone could be watching this programme. There's no way of preventing them, much against my better judgment. It's now been broadcast, it's out of our control, right? And that we don't, look, people there, we don't know what they think. They could be laughing in a really hostile way at that, going, yeah, we don't know who's there.
I think this is something that online creators should become more cognizant of. This might be more immediately obvious to a Twitch streamer because they can see the reaction of their chat and their community in real time, and there tends to be more of a direct engagement there. So here's what popular WoW streamer Asmongold had to say about the kind of humor that he used to allow in his chat and what that meant for his community.
See, that's the thing, is that how many of those people are being racist as being reactionary versus how many of them are being racist in terms of actually being racist. And this is an issue that I had on my streams, is that I would basically kind of like say whatever, you know, people can say what they want. But the issue with that is I had all the people that wanted to make racial jokes, which I thought was like, okay, fine, whatever. But then I had people that were actual racists and actually thought, you know, oh, we're the superior race, etc. They came into my stream and they thought they were among like-minded individuals. And that was a problem with my community that I had to deal with about 2 years ago.
I think this is something that a lot of YouTubers have to get to grips with and accept, that they do have an influence and power over their community. And with that comes a responsibility. That's not to say that you can't make jokes or that you can't say certain words. It's just that I think you need to be careful and aware of the kinds of jokes you're making and the kinds of people and ideas that appeals to and empowers, even if that is not your intention. You know, Chad can pretend he's not racist all he wants, and PewDiePie can pretend that him promoting ER was just an oopsie and that ER is not and that ER just dabbles in Nazi jokes. But that doesn't change the reality of the situation, that these guys are memeing pretty fucking close to the sun, and they are helping to spread and empower some dangerous ideas out there. They could just think like, oh, I don't really care, I just want to say and do what I want, and if people want to run away with that and believe what they want to believe, I don't care. Or you can even think that, in some occasions, that the comedy of what you are saying is worth whatever potential repercussions may come out of it, which is a completely fair and valid thing to argue for. This isn't like a hard line thing by any means, but what I don't think is valid is dismissing the influence that you do have. As long as you accept that that is what you're doing, and don't just brush it away or deflect away from it like a fucking coward. So when you have someone like Ethan from H3H3 literally spouting fake history and actual like Nazi conspiracy theories.
Dresden was like a historic city in Germany, said to be one of the most beautiful cities to ever exist. 2 days after the war ended, the Allies, they firebombed the whole fucking city just out of straight revenge, and they killed 300,000 civilians. Something like that. And they burned the whole city to the ground.
That's a true story.
It's a true story. It happened. Look it up.
Or when PewDiePie literally shouts out a Nazi, and yeah, ER is a Nazi. I'm basically 99.9% sure of that by now. You know, he wasn't just making Nazi references, like PewDiePie likes to say. No, he's actively spreading Nazi propaganda. It's pretty fucking blatant if you have anything more than a double-digit IQ. But of course PewDiePie doesn't, and he can circle jerk about how he's the victim in all of this, with his fan base of 70 million. Imagine being concerned that the biggest YouTuber in the world actually endorses a Nazi. Fuck me, right? Poor old PewDiePie can't even go around endorsing Nazis without getting a bit of shit. Now, if you don't want to care about the influence you have, that's fine, but you at least have to accept that you do have that influence and you are spouting some dangerous shit. You can't just claim that it was just an oopsie. Either grow some balls and just admit that you don't give a shit, or actually own up and apologize for what you did. Stop trying to defend your shitty, stupid behavior by minimizing its impact. Jesus Christ, Felix is way too fucking stupid to have 70 million subs. He's not funny, he's not clever. He's basically a scuffed, filthy Frank right now. Maybe that's another video for another time. So I guess going back to Idubbbz, my overall point here is, he makes it way too easy for people with large platforms that subsist of a lot of impressionable kids to say and do really dumb, irresponsible shit that can have actual impacts on the way people think. And the reason I chose to make this video mostly about Idubbbz and to focus on what he has said is because he is the best of this shit bunch. Like, I think he's actually a pretty intelligent guy, but I don't really have an issue with the way he uses slurs or the jokes he makes. But like I said before, how he justifies them is what I take issue with, because it allows for other stupider content creators to feel like they are justified in doing something similar, whereas they just don't have the brains to do that in a responsible way. So here's my thinking. Idubbbz makes jokes that are okay. He justifies these jokes in a really bad manner that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Other YouTubers see this sort of thing, emboldened by that sort of justification. They say and do really stupid things, thinking that it's okay, and then the viewers, who they can't control, will take that to another extreme. And thus, like, really weird ideas start becoming pervasive and common among internet communities, and they slowly start to spread. And again, this is not just some sort of cooked up theory that I've come up with. This is shown in scientific studies that suggest that certain kinds of rhetoric and language can lead to these outcomes. And if you want a real life example of that, then you just have to look at the election of Donald Trump. And yeah, I know, Orange Man bad, whatever. But every year since his election, hate crimes have risen, in large part because of the kind of rhetoric and language that he employs. The language that people with power and influence use can have a real effect on the behavior of others. And PewDiePie and Ethan and Chad are just examples off the top of my head. I'm sure there are tons of other YouTubers that aren't as relevant to me that say and do really dumb shit without considering the possible effect, and are partly emboldened by Idubbbz's justifications. Alright, I think that's the end. I think that's all I have to say. If you made it to the end, then thanks for watching, nerd.